you look at this chart, you can see that the majority is hardware and system malfunctions and human error. So even when you're talking about natural disasters, even viruses, it's only a very small piece of it. The majority of it is something else. So what are the differences between business continuity, backup, disaster recovery? So backup is just a matter of protecting the information that you have. Disaster recovery is a holistic plan around your technology to make sure that the technology is available to you should you have an event. Business continuity, which is really what is the most important part, is your business going to be viable and running in a significant event? So why is this important? Well, 43% of businesses never reopen after a disaster. That's a pretty striking statistic. A third that are closed within 2 years after that disaster. More than half never recoup the losses that they incur, and 3/4 of businesses that have tested their backup tapes were not able to use it. That's incredible, considering that's the largest way that people protect their information. So how do most businesses back up? Well, sad to say that almost half of small and medium businesses don't at all. That's scary. These are the businesses that you rely on for your services and that you run yourselves in many cases. Over half of all are on your desktops, on your laptops as you travel. That's if you're backing up servers and other systems, you're losing out on a large amount of your information. So in terms of business process documentation, we put this funny cartoon here. This is what our plan is, just to run around yelling and screaming. But at a minimum, it should include what your different recovery methods are, how to recover your systems and your business processes. That's the critical point. And also who should be doing what. It's a good thing to do anyway, even if it's not for disaster planning, to understand what everybody in your company does. But this should be at least at a minimum. First, in terms of that, define where your risk areas are. Where are you storing your information? Is it on your desktops and laptops? Are you carrying around thumb drives that have important critical data on it? Are you storing stuff online or in the cloud? Involve your employees. Your employees are the greatest resources you have in your business. So when it comes to detailed processes, chances are they know a little bit more about a detailed view of what needs to get done than you do, or that another person does in the company, or even their manager. So include them in not only in but in the planning process. Identify what their day-to-day job is, identify what resources they need to do the day-to-day job, and then plan accordingly should there be an occurrence. So what are some of the types of local backup? We've talked about some of them already. Most small businesses just use thumb drives or burn stuff to CDs. Obviously, this is practical, it's cheap, but it's problematic. The vast majority of businesses still use tape drives. They're relatively inexpensive, but as we stated already, they have poor recovery. Why? Some of it was stated by my colleagues at Allstate in terms of handling of tapes, but it also because you have the data changes in formats, and when you recover something, it may not be in the same format, and then you have general tape errors. And then you have hard drive-based devices, which are basically appliances or servers that will sit in your office, that will back up your information, and you have to remember that you also still need an off-site component to them. And we'll talk a little bit about those things in a little bit more detail. So, secure off-site storage of your data. First of all, protect it in terms of encryption. So, if you are using tapes, you still should encrypt your data, because God forbid if I'll use another off-site records company, a very large one that was a large global one, where you have tapes falling off trucks. Well, the problem with that is now you have not only you're exposing your data to other services. We had credit card numbers that were stolen that way. Make sure you encrypt your data and then provide it to a company that will properly manage that for you. Replicate your data. If your vendor, your offsite backup vendor, is not replicating your data in more than one location, what if that location that you're backing up to is not available? Are you going to be able to recover your data when you need it? Is your vendor going to be able to support you when you need it? Disasters tend to not happen in the middle of the day on a Tuesday. They're on a Saturday at 3 o'clock in the morning. Are they going to be able to support you then? So what do you need to have in place for fast recovery? So backups are great, but why are you doing it? You're doing it so that you can recover in case of a failure. So these are different ways that we talk about and different kind of recovery methods. And most of the time you'll have a combination of these so that you can bring your systems back up and running. Bare metal restore means that you'll have a server, you have multiple servers, you have a server that's standby that you can recover to very quickly within hours rather than days, which is typical if you're trying to spin tapes and back up your data. Continued data protection allows you to protect your data on an ongoing basis. And basically what happens is that little bits of data throughout the day are constantly going to your local system. And that way, if you have a failure at noon, you can recover from your information back at 11 o'clock. Then we talk about virtualization. Well, what's virtualization? It's essentially setting up a simulated server that stands in or pinch hits for your main server that fails. So your email server goes down, your backup system pinch hits for it, and you continue to work while you recover your information. This is all great, but what happens if your office is affected? That's when you need to deal with making sure that your offsite provider can not only provide you emergency data shipment, but perhaps they can also provide you a way to virtualize your server up online so that you can still access and keep your business running should your office not be available. So we talk about different kinds of recovery based on the types of outages that you have. If you have partial outage, you use your local backup system. If you have a loss of a server, again, you'll use your local backup system, maybe with a standby server. We talked, physical isolation was mentioned. In other words, your building is up and running, everything is working, but you can't get to it. The roads are closed, the tree limbs are down. You know, my office is 2 blocks from my house, and sometimes I've been unable to get to it because the tree falling down is on a county road, and we have to wait for the county to come clean up. So, but my systems are running in my office. Can I get access to them remotely? So that may be a way that you can continue to run your business while you're not able to get to your office. Electronic isolation is kind of the similar idea. My colleague Marty talked about, you know, why aren't the telephone and cable utility companies here? Because communications is a large part of what we do in our businesses. Well, electronic isolation is exactly that. What happens when your internet service goes down? If you're using Fios, do you have Cablevision as a backup? If you're using Cablevision, do you have wireless as a backup? So there's other ways that you can get around electronic isolation besides that, but that's, you know, those are the primary ways that folks can do it. Then you have the final stage, which is really you can't use your office. Your systems are unavailable. You have no electronic connections to it. Your customers can't reach your e-commerce site. All those things. Your building is on your systems are unavailable. What do you do in that scenario? And that's when we talk about using an offsite recovery facility, perhaps bringing your systems online in the offsite situation. We talked about practicing. So there are 2 types of practice testing that I'd like to talk about, and we'll talk about regulatory compliance a little bit. So what's a tabletop test? Well, a tabletop test is where you bring in your team, they sit around a table. One of my clients uses this wheel of misfortune as an example. They spin the wheel, and that's the disaster that they have to deal with it that day. So it's a complete surprise, but what it means is that they have to plan for all these scenarios. And you know, they get an extended power failure. So my colleagues down in Washington are dealing with companies that have been out of power for 2 weeks. So had those companies planned that, sat around and said, okay, if we're going to be out for 2 weeks, what do we have to do? And it's not necessarily an active drill. It's people sitting around a table and understanding what has to be done. And for the most time, you'll get to understand, oh, wait, we didn't think about that. Somebody thinks about something else. I need this vendor's information, or this other company is in my supply chain. If there's an issue, I need to plan for that. So it brings out a lot of the gaps in what your plan is. So, and it also allows you to review your current documentation and make sure that it's kept up to date. Actual recovery tests. We recommend at most businesses at least test once a year. Many of the regulated companies that deal with have to do it more often than that. But where this is actually planning on bringing some or all of your business processes online in an off-site scenario where you cannot get into your systems, or again, you can use the wheel of misfortune as an example, and then you simulate that test in a real sense. And again, if you're not recovery, backups are useless if you can't recover, and if you don't know you can recover unless you test your recovery. I briefly mentioned compliance and testing. So if you're in a regulated industry, find out what not only do you have to comply with in terms of recovery and recovery testing, but also how do you store that data. If you're dealing with healthcare records and you're dealing with HIPAA compliance, your backups also have to be compliant with those regulations as well, and so you have to make sure that you follow through on that as well. So one thing I didn't talk about is I only mentioned a little briefly is the C word, and that's the cloud. And why is that? Well, if I put all my systems up in the cloud, all this stuff goes away, right? Well, no. You still have to plan, and the cloud is whether or not your cloud provider, are they going to be available? Do you have redundant cloud providers, perhaps? We saw many systems that were utilizing one of the largest cloud providers in the world, Amazon, only several months ago, where a large swath of internet businesses went down. Why? Because was it Amazon's fault? Well, maybe that it was Amazon's fault that it went down, but those businesses still have to plan for that inevitable failure. And that may be that they don't put all their systems in Amazon, or they separate their systems with the East Coast and West Coast. In a small business scenario, you can do similar things as well, but also you have to plan for those things to occur. So in summary, and I kind of blew through that, backup and recovery doesn't have to be a difficult process. The best way to make it as seamless as possible is to document your processes. It's a good idea to do anyway. If you're a manufacturer and you're looking at ISO certification, you have to put together your SOPs, standard operating procedures. Those will go a long way to make sure that you have a plan in place. Provide good guidelines to your processes, and any business can recover. The real disaster is stressful enough. I think in some of the handouts it was talking about the psychology of disasters. Very interesting information there. That part of what goes on there is you already have to you're dealing with people who are now attending to their families. Are they going to be able to come to work? If you test things out and you properly prepare, then the disaster becomes less stressful. So on the backs of the sheets that we handed out earlier, there's a form if you're interested in a security assessment for your business. Fill it out, pass it on to us, and we look forward to speaking with you about that. There's also a self-evaluation checklist. We have a few copies at our table that you come over and fill out, and it's basically a list of questions. And obviously, it's to trick you to say no to something, so that you give us a call. But that's essentially the idea. So, thanks.